Bruchim Aboim B'Shem Irgen Shir Torah. Welcome everyone to today's shir from Rabbi Yakov Zev Smith Shlita on the Indian of Oichlin or Asurim Mishum Sakana, foods which might be dangerous. Tav the Gate Schus is sponsoring a shir called Irgen Shir Torah at 718-851-8651 or email ist@yeshivanet.com. Narrow Smith.
So, one night during the summer, I got an emergency challah. They were having a campfire, and they had marshmallows that they were toasting or roasting. And as they're roasting marshmallows on these fleishig grills, obviously, someone realized that in the ingredients of the marshmallows there's a fish gelatin, a fish extract. And the question is that a problem of mixing fish and meat? Gelatin comes from fish, and of course the grill that they used for meat was full of meat residue. Is that part of the sakana of basa v'dagim? Then I saw rather a very popular meat sauce that has a small amount of fish in it. It's an anchovy type of fish flavor, and people use it for meat. How is that mutter? Why is that a sakana basa v'dagim? And I was very also intrigued about the question of eating olives. People eat olives, even though the Gemara says in Hirius that eating olives is kosher l'shikcha. So that brought us to the sugya of today, what we call the dangerous foods in halacha, and which is a big sugya and an important sugya. Now, I say big sugya because it happens to be in Arachayim and Siman Kuf Ayin Gimel. It's in Yeridea Kuf Tezayin, in Chayshim Mishpat, at the very end, Siman Tov Chav Zayin. So besides that, it's very common questions, very many questions, but it's really all over Shulchan Aruch. And I say it's an important sugya because we see something regarding this sugya that's probably unprecedented. The Mechaber says in Tov Chav Zayin and Chayshim Mishpat Siv Ches, you have to be careful, mitzvahs asay, to avoid all sakana situations. Shenemar, and he quotes the pasuk in Veschanan, Hishabalacha ushmar nafshecha ma'oid. And if you're not careful with your health, you're a mavatal this asay. So it seems like from the Mechaber that a person that does something that's dangerous, eats something that's dangerous, he's oivan a deraisa. Now there's no doubt the source of this Mechaber is the Gemara in Brachas Lamed Beis, Amid Beis, that famous story about a chaser echad that was davening, and as we know, a sar greeted him and he ignored him, he didn't respond. So the sar waited till he finished davening, and afterwards he says, "You empty person, it says in your Torah, Hishamalacha ushmar nafshecha ma'oid, it says in your Torah, Nishmarta ma'oid l'nafshei seichem, and you violated that. Because I greeted you and you didn't respond. I could have killed you and you deserved it. How did you neglect your health in such a dramatic way?" Okay, so the emphasis of the story had a happy ending, but that's not the point for today. It seems from this Gemara that if someone does something that's dangerous and reckless, he's over on the psukim, Hishamalacha ushmar nafshecha ma'oid, v'nishmarta ma'oid, 2 ma'oids. And indeed, on this Mechaber, where the Mechaber quotes the pasuk, Hishamalacha ushmar nafshecha, the Gaon says very cryptically, Perek Hey Brachas, which is referring to this Gemara in Brachas. And the Lavush in the end of Tav Chav Zayin says if someone does something dangerous, he's over on the deraisa of Hishamalacha ushmar nafshecha ma'oid. So we definitely see a source min ha-Torah to avoid doing dangerous things. The Pella is, if you look at the psukim that the Gemara quotes, there's nothing to do with dangerous acts. Hishamalacha ushmar nafshecha ma'oid, as the Mishnah says in Masechta Avos, Perek Gimel, Mishnah Ches, and the Gemara Menachos of Tzadik Tesamot Beis says, if someone forgets his learning or causes himself to forget his learning, he's oiv hanishamalacha ushmar nafshecha ma'oid. The pasuk nishmart ma'oid nafshei seichem is talking about Kabbalas Hatar and Har Sinai, and that's why both of them are shown on this Gemara in Brachis, and the Mechaschenech and Tavkuf Mem Vav wonder, how do you bring a raya from this sar? The Mechaschenech says he was an apikoris who distorted the words of Torah, but it doesn't mean dangerous things, it means forgetting Torah. So obviously, if the Mechaber quotes the pasuk, and that's the way the Mashal seems to imply, The pasuk has two meanings. Shikras HaTorah, and also generally doing dangerous things. And that's why I can't say it's pashit, because that there's an issa deraisa of doing dangerous things, because at the end of Tav Chav Zayin, the Mechaber says if someone does something dangerous, he gets makis mardis. Now, had it been a deraisa, why makis mardis? So again, there's a lot to talk about, and we don't have the time now. But I could say that according to many shitas, and that's the pashas of the Mechaber, and the Levush, and the Sma, if someone eats foods that are dangerous, or does dangerous things, he's oiv on a deraisa of Hishamluch Harshmanafshich Ma'oid, Nishmarta Ma'oid. All agree it's minimally an Issa D'Rabbanan based on the pasuk. But we see a different facet of how careful we have to be. Literally, Nishmarta Ma'oid, Hishamlucha Ushmanafshcha Ma'oid. The Lashon of the Gemara in Chul and Daf Yud Amud Aleph speaks volumes. Where the Gemara says, Shma Mina, from what the Gemara said earlier, Chamirã Sakanta Meisura. In other words, if you have a suffix issa, so perhaps you could be mekel, sveika d'rabbanan l'kula. But a suffix sakana, you can't be mekel. And twice the Shulchan Aruch quotes this, in Kuf Ayin Gimel Beis regarding basa v'dagim, and in Kuf Tezayin, the Ramah in Sif Hey says you have to be careful from all dangerous things, because sakanta Chamirã meisura. And more than you have to worry about a suffix issa, you have to worry about a suffix sakana. So, lamaisa, whether it's deraisa or d'Rabbanan, it could be deraisa. But everybody agrees, Chamirã sakanta meisura. In fact, the Goyin on that Ramah sends you to a Yerushalmi in Trumas Perek Ches, Mishnah Gimel, that says also Chamirã sakanta meisura. So therefore we could take the liberty of saying that the sugya of today is a big and a very important sugya. Twice the pasuk says ma'oid. But before we apply this lamaisa, I must mention at least one more point. Because someone might ask, listen, it's my life, I'm a big boy, it's a free country, why can I do what I want? I enjoy doing things, I enjoy jumping out of the plane and call it skydiving, which the Zalman is quoted as saying is an issa deraisa of Nishmarat Moed. But what's wrong? I can do it. It's my life. So the Mechaber says, I told you earlier, in the end of Tav Chav Zayin, if a person does things that are dangerous, and he says, what's your business? He gets makis. Zokti Ber HaGoyla. Now typically the Ber HaGoyla gives us Mar Mekaimis. But here he gives us an insight. He asks the question, why is the Torah and why Chazal so focused? Nishmarta Ma'oid, why can you make your own decisions? So he says a beautiful insight. The Rebbe Shem created a human being and gave him the greatest gift is called life. A person could do mitzvahs, accrue schusim. The Rebbe Shem gave us the opportunity of doing mitzvahs. And therefore, if someone does something dangerous, or lives dangerously, or eats unhealthy foods that are dangerous, kilumoyis beratzan boiroi, ve'einai roitz loy b'avaydasai v'loy b'matan scharai, the greatest hefkeris, the greatest zilzul, is a person that doesn't protect his life, doesn't protect the most precious commodity he has. That's life. Beautiful insight. Life is so precious that life could do mitzvahs. You know, someone told me, Grada, he was once driving in a Goyish neighborhood, and he read the billboard. Now, it's not a good idea to read these billboards because they're full of schmutz and pretzes. But this one was very tzimzach. I don't know who put it up, what the agenda was, but it was written in big letters, the saying, time is money, is a disgrace to time. Imagine a goyish couple this fashtanin. Time is much more than money. Oh, so let's talk erlich hayidin. So what is time? It's much more than money. We would say time is olam haba. That sounds pretty idealistic, but it's not true. Because the Mishnah Nava says, Yafa sha'achas b'tshuva ma'istay b'olam hazeh mikol chay olam haba. So time is more than olam haba. So what is time? Time is life. A moment of life is more than olam haba. Time is life. And that's why a person that lives carefully and eats healthy and lives carefully is protecting the most precious commodity, and that's life itself. He's preparing for a long, healthy life. I was Zeichet in Rabbi of Kamenetsky. He once told me in passing, he just went to a doctor, and he was 89 years old at the time. The doctor says he has the physical fitness of a 35-year-old man. He ate healthy, he was a very careful person, and a Sigalungen, he was Zeichet to live a long, productive life, and he was full of energy, come out till the end. So that's really, we have to go to halacha l'maisa, but it's important to know it's a very worthwhile investment. Now let's apply it l'maisa. Question that comes up in different forms. I'll give you a common example. A person used a fish fork, checked the gefilte, and then by mistake used the same fish fork that had some fish residue and put it into the challah. A mixture of a little bit fish in a lot of meat. So we know in Yeridei Kuf Tezayin Beis, and also it's in Arachayim Kufayin Gimel, one of the examples of Dvarim Asurim Mishum Sakana is a mixture of fish and meat. Now we don't know, but it seems to be it's dangerous. Someone told me, a very knowledgeable person, he said in Japan it's an absolute no-no. They'd never mix fish and meat. Not that we need a raya from Japanese, but the Torah Chazal told us that mixing fish and meat is not safe. So the question is the challah still mutter if a little bit of fish found its way into the challah? So you're wondering, what's the shayla? This is bittul b'shishim. If even milk fell into meat, basa b'chalav, it's bittul b'shishim. In fact, some pais can say, you're not allowed to be machmir, because if it's mutter, it's mutter. However, there's a taz. The taz in Yeridei Kuf Tezayin, Sifkat and Beis, based on a maril and a darkei Moshe, the Taz says, guess what? A little bit milk into meat is bottle, but a little bit fish into meat is asa. Why? Chamirã Sכנתא מאיסורא. And the emphasis, you look in the Maril HaChadoshos, in Siman Pei Vav, one of the Rishonim, he already makes this observation that some hold that fish and meat is more chamer than milk and meat. I mean, milk and meat is 3 Isurei Torah, like Savashik will do 3 times. But this is the understanding of Chamirã Sכנתא מאיסורא. Now, Lamaisa, there is a big Mokum L'chalek, and that's Taka the Taina of the Shach and the Kudas HaKesef on this Taz. If there's a sakana and a chanami Chamirã Sכנתא, but if we're going to say that the little fish is bottled in the meat, so there's no longer sakana. If there's no sakana, what's Chamirã Sכנתא מאיסורא? In other words, the bittul takes away the sakana. You know what it's like? Poison is very dangerous, could kill someone. But if someone dilutes the poison in a big volume of food, it's no longer dangerous. So the assumption, says the Shach, is that if there's bittul, there's no sakana. So it's not a violation of Chamirã Sכנתא מאיסורא. And that's taka the way the Shach, the Gil Yamar, and that's what the Welt seems to be saimach on. If fish falls into meat less than shishim, you have a problem. If there's more than shishim, we say it's bottle and there's no sakana. But the question that now needs some attention, and let's say it wasn't a little bit fish. Let's say the gefilte fish dripped right into the challah, and there's no shishim. So now you have a dangerous food, a dangerous combination, fish and meat. So someone suggested, what's the problem? Take some more challah, and you'll make it into shishim. But the problem is, who doesn't know the Mechab and Yeridei Tzadik Tes Hey, that aim about mitzvah. And that's why the Marsham and the Tshuva and Gimel and Chayla Gimel Simareish Peiches, he says, wait a minute. According to the Taz, there's no bittul. You want to really push things and make bittul? No. Havud leila haisif, don't. It's big enough cooler relying on bittul, but you can't make a bittul. And the Avnei Tzedek in Yeridei Simim Memtes, he says, how can anybody make it? This is an Issa Deraisa of the Shmart Nafshe Seichem. So there are shittas that hold that if there's no shishim, you can add more to make it bottle. Ein bevatel is l'chatchila. But here also, Rabbi say, there is a makom l'chalik. Because enechanami, you can't be mevatel and issa. But if you add more chalent, it's no longer dangerous. You're not being mevatel and issa. What you're really doing is you're taking away an issa. I'll give you a mashal. Imagine there's a big, delicious pot of challah, and a very dangerous, sharp piece of metal fell into the challah. And you ask the Rav, what should I do? It's a very tiny piece of metal, but it's dangerous. Whoever eats it might die. And the Rav says, this is a real sakana. The challah is awesome. Okay, someone decides to brave it and sticks his hand in and feels around and about to take out that sharp metal. So you say, no, you're not going to do that. The Rav said it's awesome. So it's a joke. I'm taking out a sakana. I'm not making battle issa. So the many poskim, the Pesachei Tshuva and many others say, if you add more challah, you're not being mevatel and issa, like if you add more meat, you're mevatel the bas v'cholov. You're taking away the sakana. Now the emes is, we saw machmir. What did they hold? They held once it's sakana, there's an issa. So I could say not all agree, but we did see a tzad to be makel. If there's shishim, we rely on the shach. If there's no shishim and you could somehow add more heta, it's not so pashit, but we could say yesh lahakol to add more and make it bittul. Next question, someone asked me recently, I never thought of it, it's a good question. There's a whole siman in Yeridea Peiches that not only you can't eat fish and milk and meat together, but you can't even have two people eating depending on the same table. Shulchan echad. I can have, let's say at work, my fleishig sandwich, and you have your melachik sandwich. Unless there's a hecker, but you can't have people eating milk and meat on the same table. So someone asked me, I go to a shul and I see on a kiddush, there's viltevish, there's herring, there's challah, there's tutzach. Maduch by basa b'cholav, there's shulchan echad, there's asa, unless there's a hecker. So by basa b'dogim, Xamira Sakanta, we should definitely say you can't put milk, meat, and fish on the same table. And the emes of the Darkei Tshuva and our Simon, Sivkot and Yud Gimel, quotes a Kol Yehuda and a Chanami, and the Kaf HaChaim, Sivkot and Lamed Hey, you can't put on the same table fish and meat. And the truth is, it's worse than the previous case. Because the previous case, I'm eating milchiks, you're eating fleishigs. Here, it's the same person that's eating both. However, and Reza Pella, the Noid Yehuda, in a tshuva in a totally different context, in Ebenezer, Kama, Siman Yud Gimel, discusses Hakana in Ebenezer, and he says, but you know, the chashash that you might come to do an Issa, by Sakana does not exist. You're allowed to have fish and meat on the same table. Xamiras Sakanta, he says, Punk Fakert. Since Xamiras Sakanta Meisura, you will never come to mixing fish and meat. Punk Fakert. Because it's so chama, you won't do it. And Taka the Shevet Alevi and Chelik Vav Kuf Yud Aleph and the Puparov Ayan Yosef Aleph Kuf Yud Gimel, he says, Hiyanei Senes Adarabah. Here is where Xamiras Sakanta will become a kula. You're looking at fish, you're looking at meat, you won't mix the two. Because you know how dangerous that is. Bas b'chala? No. I mean, we don't, but we think we might do it by mistake. But you're so far removed, you'll never come to mix fish and meat. And Lamaisa, what should I tell you? That seems like Minhag Olam. You see people on the same table, there's fish, there's meat. Obviously, they're so worried it won't come to mix. We have a question often, a person baked a challah in a fleishig oven, and they want to have it together with fish. Is that a problem of Xamira Sakanta Misuri, you're mixing fish and meat? So the emes is, you're tempted to say that's a problem. Because if I cook milk in a clean fleishig pot that was used that day, the milk is also midaraisa, tam keika. The milk is also, the pot is also. So if I baked challah in a fleishig oven, it should be fleishigs l'chayra. How could I have it with fish? I'm mixing fish and meat. But you can't say that. Because we all remember the Gemara, the famous Gemara in Chulin, big Yisoid, the Chulin Chufir Aleph, on the Beis, Dogim sha'olu b'ka'ara, mutta lo'eichlam b'kutach. Which means you have a fish, piece of fish, you put it onto a very hot plate. So the question is now the fish absorbed some of the meat, but still, says the Gemara, you're allowed to have that fish with milchig dip. Because it's not enough fleishig to make it basa b'cholav. So that fish you could have with a milchig dip. That's the lashon of the Gemara. Frek the taz, that's a very important taz in your day at Sad the K, Siv Gimel, Sikot and Gimel. Wait a second. How could you have the Forget about the milk. How could you have the fish? The fish is fish. It has a tam of basa, and it's a ben yoim by tam. Zok the taz, a tremendous yisoid. You're right, fish and meat is a terrible sakana. But the only sakana is when you have fish and meat, literally. A bliya, a tam of meat, is not a sakana. Fish with a tam of meat, or fakir, meat with a tam of fish is not a problem. It's only the combination of fish and meat. In fact, that's why the Taz says, that's why mi'ikadadin, you're allowed to cook gefilte fish in a challah pot, or vice versa if it's clean. The minig is we have special fish pots, but there's no sakana in bliyas, only in the real thing. So therefore, if the oven was clean, there's no mamoshes, there's no splatter, and you're only worrying about the bliyas from the walls that affect the challah, there's no problem. You could have that fish, you could have that challah with fish. If the oven is full of mamoshes of meat, and some of it went on to the challah, so then the challah is fleishig. So fleishig with fish, of course, is awesome. Someone asked me, he likes to warm up the challah Shabbos morning, puts it on top of the challah pot. Could he have that challah with fish? So I told him, I'm not in your house, but if you're right, there's no zeya, there's no moisture from the challah, it's just the heat of the challah pot, then you could have that challah with fish. If you taste fleishigs in your challah, that means some of the zeya, some of the essence must have escaped and gone onto the challah. But if it's just a question of the challah taking the warmth, so no challah flies through the cover, that's not a problem, and therefore you could have that with your fish. A question I wanted to talk about, if you cut an onion with a fleishig knife and you made gefilte fish. So there is a shita that's machmir, because we know davacharif and you duchka the sakin, if you cut a sharp item, it revitalizes the fleishigs in the knife. And taka the darke tshuva brings a shita in Sivkot and Chavzayin that is sakana. But the MS is, it's really hard to understand. Because in the worst scenario, by cutting this onion, all you did was you put a bliya. There's no mamoshes. And that's why the darke tshuva himself and many poskim say afterwards that we don't have to worry about that. This is only a concern of bliyas, and there's no sakana by bliyas. Now the next question is really a fascinating issue. There is a famous meat sauce. Now it's interesting that there are two pronunciations, but basically it's a Worcestershire or Worcester sauce. Basically it's labeled as a meat sauce, but it has an anchovy fish flavor. Anchovy is a kosher fish, of course. It has a discernible fish flavor in it. So that sounds like a pretty dangerous combination. The sauce itself is parva, but it has a fish flavor, and it's labeled as a meat sauce. So you're putting a sauce that has fish in it on top of meat. Why isn't that a sakana? So the redeeming factor here is that there's really a small amount of fish. It's less than shishim. There's a bittul b'shishim of the fish in the sauce. So that's why you could be makel. But 1 second, like the taz l'chayra, you have a problem. Because even if it's a small amount, it's not bottled. So I saw in Rabbi Belsky, the Shulchan Alevi, and Chav Gimel Siman Aleph, Sif Aleph, he has a tshuva about this, and he says, Enechanami, if the sauce has enough fish that is not bottled b'shishim, then you can't use it for meat. If it has taka a little amount, which typically it probably does, less than and taka bottled b'shishim, so we treat the sauce as parva without fish, and you could have it on your meat because the sauce was bottled in the sauce itself. He does say that lamaisa, you should label, if there's taka a problem of the fish not being bottled, you have to label fish. And he says his experiences show you have to write the word fish. Because sometimes they write the ingredient, let's say he gave an example, omega-3 oil. Now who knows, unless you're knowledgeable, omega-3 oil is fish. So don't write omega-3 oil, write fish. So people should know this, let's say a person is machmer like the taz, he shouldn't be using this sauce. So you write clearly there's a fish extract, and people would be weird not to take it. Now, Lamaisa, I had a question, I wonder out loud. maybe this sauce will be mutter even according to the Taz that holds there's no bittul by sakana. And I think the svar is pretty mistavra. Let's say a piece of tarfus falls into my kosher challah, and it's bottled because it's talking more than shishim. So it's mutter. And you want to go into the lumdis, this treif in my challah, bittul b'shishim, I have a monas chazal, nisapach li yisheta. So why don't we say that when they manufactured this sauce that has less than, let's say 1% or less of fish, the fish content is bottled. Now there's no fish. It's a sauce. The Taz says that there's no bittul. That means when fish falls into meat. But when fish was manufactured with an ingredient that overwhelms it and it's bottled, so the fish content was bottled. Now you have a heta. So even the Taz will be makel. So I think this is quite mistavra, but there are two problems with it. First of all, if something is put in as an ingredient, as a shita of the Rajba, in Yeridea, in the end of Kuf Lamadala, the Shechnara quotes it, if it's put in as an ingredient, it's not bottled. You want it to be there. I don't know, Yehuda argues, look in the Pesachei Tshuva, okay, but there's a shita of the Machaba. And also, there is a shita of the Tzemach Tzedek that says, when is there a bittul? If there's a chashash issa, you have to come on to bittul. When you manufactured this meat sauce, you had no problems. There's no reason to say it's bottled. You need a chashash to make bittul. Okay, so yes, the falpel, but definitely we could say this sauce, since it's probably, at least the mitzvahs that I've heard, it's taka bottle b'shishim, it's mutter to use it on meat. And like the Taz, probably it could also be mutter, unless you say, like we said, that it can't. There was no din bittul. The other question of marshmallow that has a fish gelatin, using it with meat is something we have to explain a little bit about gelatin. Now, gelatin, as we once spoke about a number of years ago, gelatin is typically made from meat, whether it's the bone or the skin. Today, it's mostly the skin. But it's basically an extract of the skin of the meat, a tasteless powder that they extract through, of course, through processing. It has no taste. So when they started making gelatin, so Rav Moshe in Yeridea, Chelik Aleph and Chelik Beis, Chav Zayin again, and Rav Aaron and a beautiful tshuva in Yeridea, Tez Zayin, both said if the gelatin is made from behemoths tameis, so gelatin is treif. You can't use gelatin. Okay, some are makel, but that's what the olam accepted. Treif gelatin we don't use. Then they decided to say, well, so let's make kosher gelatin. Not a big deal. Take the same skins of kosher behemoth shchutas and make gelatin. So they started doing that. And I remember the first time I saw that, they had a Hamish brand of marshmallows. It said in big letters, Nasa mi behemoth shchutas. And the next line says kosher parva. I said, wait a minute, something's wrong here. Behemoth shchutas, kosher parva doesn't seem to stim. But both Rav Moshe and Rav Aaron say it's not a problem. Because really for basa b'cholav, it says, they quote shitas, it has to be basa, right? If it's just the skin, the tasteless skin, so it's not considered a mixture of basa b'cholav. So kolshkein, if you mix gelatin, which is a tasteless powder that was this hapech, panim chadashos, it's still treif, but it lost its identity as fleishigs. So now it's parva. So you could have a gelatin that has an animal base, but is kosher parva. So that's why they taka make marshmallows and it's labeled kosher parva, because tak it's kosher, but it's not bosa. Now, to apply that to a fish gelatin, l'char the same is true. Fish gelatin, don't forget, fish is very easy to make gelatin. You know, gelatin as in congealed gel. And if you ever make regular fish, salmon or whitefish, and you put it in the refrigerator, all of a sudden the sauce congeals, because again it's very hydrophilic, the gelatin of fish. So they started making gelatin from fish. So the same heta applies. When they took gelatin and they took the fish and made it into gelatin, it lost its shem dagim. Now you put it into marshmallow, it's a kosher marshmallow. So to put that on a fleishig grill is not a problem of basa v'dagim. I saw Rabbi Yashiv quoted by his Talmud in Yisa Yosef Chelik Beis Siman Yud Zayin. He says Rabbi Yashiv wasn't so excited about taking meat gelatin and putting it together with milk. Ramaish Chiddush he wasn't so excited about. But he said, meat and fish, that's no problem, because the fish was totally changed. It's not fish. Another common example I always wanted to clarify, we spoke about this in the past, about mixing fish and milk. Now, I'd be careful. Fish and milk. Now, the emphasis is that the pashtus is what's wrong with milk, mixing fish and milk. The pasuk says, like savashul gedi b'chalevim, you can't mix milk and meat. Chazal says you can't mix fish and meat. But what's wrong with having a bagel, lox, and cream cheese sandwich? And the emphasis is it's a fleishig gemara that it's mutter. Let's go back to Chul and Kuf Yud from Beis. Dogim she'alu b'ka'ara mutter lechel b'kusach. So we're all excited. How could you eat the fish? The fish has a meat flavor. Forget about that. How could you put it into kusach milachix? You're eating fish with milk. The teretz is, and that's why many poskim say this emphatically, there's no problem of mixing fish and milk. What's wrong? And that's why if you never heard of this minig, or you don't have this minig, it's a Gemara, and basically there's no source. However, as we discussed, that was tape 248, the Beis Yosef in Yeridei Siman Pei Zayin, he says something very surprising. Ein lechol dogim b'chalav b'me'asakana. Can't have fish and milk. Zok the Darkei Moshe the Ramah l'reisi miyama in his harm b'zeh. I never heard of this. Beis Yosef sakana, never heard of it. What's the sakana? Fish and meat, yeah. Fish and milk. What's the problem? So again, a lot has been written. The Yavitz in Archaim Kufay and Gimel says I found a Beinu Bachai that says fish and milk is sakana. So we're not getting into that now. But at the end of the day, Svardim go with the Beis Yosef and will not mix fish and milk. Ashkenazim are divided. Many people have no problem with mixing fish and milk or cooking fish and milk. And many Chassidim and others are shtikl machmer not to mix fish and milk. Okay. Now the question is, you see today in yeshivas and camps, they serve typically for lunch bagels, cream cheese. Now they don't serve lax. It's not a 5-star hotel, mind you. They serve the lax spread. There's echel churban of lax, but something and you're mixing fish and cream cheese. So I wonder if those that are makbid even realize that they're mixing lax and cream cheese. So what I was thinking is the Pesachei Tshuva and others say that the butter, even if you're makbid of mixing fish and milk, but butter with fish is okay. Because butter is significantly different. Maybe cream cheese has the same halacha like butter. But the emphasis is cream cheese, although it is the upper part of milk, but there's a part of regular milk is added to cream cheese. So it doesn't seem that there's much of a heta of mixing lax and cream cheese, unless again your minig is b'chal not to worry about mixing the two. For Svardim will never mix fish and milk like the Beis Yosef. But I saw Rabbi Yosef says, but they put fish gelatin into yogurt to give it that body that it needs, and that's mutter even for a Svardi. You don't mix fish and milk. But the gelatin is considered a non-fish food because it lost its identity as fish, and they're soymech on that it became a new type of food in Gans. Another dangerous food, if you could give it that name, is what people could think came from Nazaris Adibris, is the question of eating the end piece of a loaf of bread or a challah. So the emphasis is, I can't say this, but Reb Chaim Kanievsky was asked, and I saw there's a number of svarim in his name, that there's no makar for this minig. It's perfectly mutter. I never found it. No. If he says it, he knew what he was talking about. But Lamaisa, people are makbid. So I saw the Menashe Klein, Chelik Yud Aleph Kuf Mem Ches, he says a suggestion that it's based on a different concept. The Gemara says in Sanhedrin of Tzadik Beis, and it's Gepaskin and Archaim Simon Kuf Pei, that if someone benches and doesn't have bread on the table, Ein Eirayah Simon Bracha L'Olam, he'll never see a bracha. Why? Rashi explains, you're benching and you don't have bread. Let's say an ani comes, he wants to eat, you have nothing to give him. So if you're not thinking of others, you're not going to see a bracha. Now, but the Maisa people, they don't leave over food. What's going to happen? What's going to be? So therefore, the minig became not to eat the end piece. So you have a built-in left bread on the table, and you'll have the bracha from benching, which is a beautiful idea, but that doesn't make the bread awesome. You could have the end piece for supper instead of for lunch. So it doesn't really fit with the minig. I saw a different suggestion, also something that is interesting, that sometimes you don't know where the bread came from, did it take off challah or not. So if you leave the end piece over and don't eat it, that's the challah you're taking. Now that sounds good, but then again, are you conceding that this challah wasn't taking? So how do you eat it in Eretz Yisrael? You're not going to leave over challah and eat it on Shabbos. You have to be mafresh first. So it doesn't seem to be, plausible. So what I think is the emes pshat, the Minchas Yitzchak Chelik Tes Siman Ches. He says, I was asked this question. I also didn't find the makar, but he says I follow the Yerushalmi, that if people say not to do it, don't do it. And he quotes a Rashba that if there's a Kabbalah by the Zaydis and the Babas not to do something, don't do it. And he quotes an amazing Heishav Moshe, the Yismach Moshe, in Yerdei Siman Kuf Gimel, that says, don't be doichet the Kabbalah that the Babas have, even if you have Shishim Ribui Moifsim Hamarim Soisrei. You have 600,000 reasons to dispute and disprove what the Babas say. Just follow the Babas. He says, if my Baba didn't eat the end piece, I'm not going to eat the end piece. Okay, no, that's, you could say, you don't have to know the reason. So I could say, if your Messiah is not to eat the end piece, taka don't. If you have no problem with, if you're not your Messiah, so you follow Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky, and Yoich Lanav and V'yizbo. Another sakana question I always wanted to discuss is the Gemara says in Brachas Daf Nunhei, Daf Yomi learned Brachas not so long ago, there are 10 things that cause stomach disorder, sakana, and one of them is a oichel shedroi shel dog. Person eats the spine of a fish. So typically we don't eat spines of fish, but when a person has sardines that's not boneless, you'll see the center. This is spine. Or if you buy a canned salmon and the spine is edible. Is dangerous. So I was thinking maybe the fact is that bones are typically muktzah on Shabbos. But if you cook the bone till it's edible and you eat the sardine bone, it's v'ari not muktzah. So maybe the sakana is only when you eat a bone that's not edible. But today's sardines and the salmon, that's edible. In fact, it's eaten. But then the question is, so what is the Gemara talking about? Someone that ate a bone and chokes to death? Of course it's dangerous. Obviously, so I wasn't so comfortable, but I did see Rabelski in the Shulchan Alevi, Chav Gimel Zayin, and the Ber Moshe in Chelik Chesim and Tzadik, both discuss sardines, and they both say the same yisoid. The Betzin Rav is very convinced there's no shaila whatsoever. If it's edible and you eat it like so, it's not a sakana. Okay, so I follow the Gedolim. You could eat the center of it, but I did see in the Sefer Shmir Saguf HaNefesh in Siman Reish Samachei, he quotes Rab Chaim Kanievsky that the uncle, the Chazon Ish, and his father did not eat the center of the sardines because they were concerned about this Gemara. So there you have another possible Dvar Masur Mishum Sakana. Another interesting Sakana that has resurfaced in recent times is what's really based on a Derech Eretz Rabbah Perik test, and the Mechaba quotes it in Kufay and Sif Tezayin, La Yishta Miyakois V'yitn L'chaveiroi Mipnei Sakonais Nefoshes. Come on, that's the lashon of Derech Eretz Rabbah. Don't drink from someone else's mouth. In other words, someone drank, so don't give someone else a drink from your kais. Now, this is a pretty strong lashon, Sakonis Nefoshes. The Mechaba used lashon Sakonis Nefoshes. The question is, we go to a kiddush, someone makes kiddush, gives other people the drink. You go to a bris, a sheva bracha, they pass around the kaishal bracha. What about this mechaba? So Zok de Bach, of an art, quoting a marshal, it's not the danger of the remaining drink that's the problem. But the person that you're giving to the drink might be a mefunik. He's very sensitive, and he really doesn't want to drink it. But you're giving it to him, he's embarrassed not to. He's going to drink it, force him up to drink it, and that's the sakana. Again, he's very sensitive, he's a mafunik, and that's sakana. You force him to do what he doesn't want to do. So therefore says the Bach, Oy Bazoy, you know what the eight is? You make kiddush or make the bracha by the bris and put down the kais. Whoever takes it, gesund to hate, I'm not forcing him. So that would alleviate our concern. Don't give it, put it down. But says the Taz of an art, I found a Blutzvar Ablezer Agadol, that says that the problem is not that the person will be forced to drink it against his will, The problem is that the remaining drink has someone's germs. So how could you be mekel? And Itaka says, I've seen in countries that they don't drink from leftovers in someone else's mouth. Now again, especially with COVID, this has become more of an issue. That's why drinking from someone else's mouth seems to be keneged a machab and shulchan aruch. However, in Kuf Ayin Sif Chav Beis, the Mechaba says, after you drank and there's leftover wine, and you want to give it to someone else, first wipe around the lip, the rim of the cup, and then give it to someone to drink. So, Frek Del Yerabba, I don't get it. Earlier, Yusuf Elazar Gadol said that the leftover is dangerous. And here you say, just wipe around the rim, the lip of the kais. But the remaining is still dangerous, Frek Del Yerabba. So, Del Yerabba, the difference is, if the person that drank, you know who he is, it's your father or your son, whatever it is, family, and you know he's healthy, like the Mishnah explains, if you've got Lamed Zayin, then there's no problem in the remnants of the kais. So it's not a stira. A person that you don't know, he might have a germ, might have a virus, stay away. Someone that you know is healthy, you could drink his remains that he left over in the kais. So Oy Bazai, it's a little of an issue. And I saw the Shmir Shabbos in Memches, Ha'ara Samachtes asked this. He says, people typically make Kiddush, and they pass around the kais of Kiddush. He says, if it's your, the way he adds in the Challah Gimel, if it's your family, and the person that you drink from, you know he's healthy, is fine. But what's the heta of drinking a kais from someone you don't know? So someone is saying, Dvar mitzvah. Mitzvah to drink from the kais, Shay mitzvah yeda davara. But we once spoke about it, that was Shir 861, that's only when it's not shchichi azeka. When the shchichi azeka, we don't say Shay mitzvah yeda davara. So you have to be careful. At a time when it was dangerous, it's dangerous. So the emes is, I always say this, the best thing, I do this every Shabbos, and all the time, when you make Kiddush, before you drink, pour off from the wine into a clean cup and pass it around. Then drink from the kais. Now, my own family, not so makbid, but when you have, let's say, guests, or even children-in-law, or in-laws, whatever it is, some people are mafunik. Mafunik is not a chisaron. It's the way the Baruch made a person. Some people are sensitive and not keen about drinking from your mouth. So why get involved with giving someone something he might not want? Now, people think, but if I pour it off, I'm losing kaishal bracha. But that's not true. If you drank from the kais and then you pour out from the kais, that wine is pogum. Now, if you want to see the details, the Shmir Shabbos in Memches Yud Aleph and a beautiful tshuva in the Shraga Amer Chelikei Kuvav discuss the hilchais pogum of it. But there's no doubt about it. If I make kiddush on the kais and I pour off first, and then I pass that, and then I drink from the kais, both are kaishal bracha and both are not pogum. And most importantly, you avoided the giving someone that drink from your mouth who might not want to. So it's a good idea, you make kiddush, you first, before you drink, pour off into the kais, or pour off into more wine, pass it around, and you avoid all sveikas. Now, if you can't do that, for whatever reason you can't do that, so at least drink and then wipe around the kais. Or with family, you could be mekel, and none of the above is necessary. Now, it's interesting that I used to watch Rabbi Yankov Kamenetsky when he would, a lot of us on August, it's interesting, when he would kiss the Sefer Torah, he would bend down to kiss the Sefer Torah, but he really wouldn't kiss the Sefer Torah. He would hold onto the mantle with his hand and kiss his hand. So we once asked him, I don't know if he ever answered, but I found Rav Henkin in Eidus Yisrael Amud Kuf Chav Gimel, says when he was traveling, he passed by Sfardim, and Sfardim don't b'chlal kiss the Sefer Torah. They pick up their hand in the direction of the Sefer Torah and they kiss their hand. He says there are two reasons. First of all, what are you so hamish? You're mechut with the Sefer Torah, you kiss it. And also, he's worried about germs. So if you pick up your hand, you kiss your hand, there's no germs. The Tzlois of Avram, the Chechanov, and the Sidda, and Chelik Aleph Shin Ayin Hey, says also not to kiss the mantle directly because you're leaving germs for the next person. And Rabbi Yashiv was also concerned about this, and I'm not sure if he did exactly this, but he used to, maybe like Rabbi Yakov, he would kiss his hand, not the mantle. So it's interesting that the Rabbi Henkin that mentions maybe the reason is not to kiss with your mouth, that mantle, because you're depositing germs. He says this is similar to Simon Kuf Ayin about drinking from a kais and passing it on. So it's really the same concern. It's a way of unknowingly passing on germs. Now, Lamaisa, I want to be clear. The Welt is makel, and because again, if a person's healthy and Shem Mitzvah Davara, you're doing a kibbutz Torah, and you don't have to worry. Don't forget, to worry is a problem. Excessiveness or obsessiveness is dangerous. That's also Sakana is called OCD. Obsessive as in OCD. So a person has to live normally, and most people do kiss the mantle, maybe taka during the COVID time, with the height of it, people are taka very careful. But either way is good, but Rabbi Yankov's way is really satisfying both concerns. You do it in a way that's not nicker, you're not you're not worrying anybody. So it was just a point that you see how we have a living Torah, that really everything is applicable. Another point of sakana I would be remiss in not mentioning, the Rambam Hilchos Deis Perek Daled Halacha Tezvav lays down the law very clearly. Achiלה gasa leguf k'moi sama maves v'hu ikka l'chol hachaloyim. Look, the Rambam, roiv chaloyim come from food that people eat either unhealthy or in too great of quantities, overeating. And then he says an amazing taich. That's the chachma of shleima, shoyma piv, u'lishaynai, shoyma mitzaras nafshay. Lishaynai means what you say. Piv means what you eat. But the Rambam's lashon is incredible. That his lashon is the ikka l'chol hachaloyim. Someone once showed me a report, and I quote, the second most preventable cause of death in America is obesity. In other words, some machlas we can't prevent, but a machal that we could prevent and we don't is obesity, which is overeating. So in the Rambam's times, it was the most common cause. Now it's second place, but it's a pliya. And that's why Lamaisa, you talk about sakana food, sometimes the food can be glat kosher, chol of Yisrael, but the amounts of it. I remember Apam once was speaking about eating healthy, and he spoke a lot about that, and once he was struggling, I say it was a mysterious nefesh to get these words out of his mouth, but he said, I once read that people dig their graves with their own teeth. Now, it was very uncharacteristic, but it was a very important point. Overeating puts a person into the grave. And that's what the Rambam says. And the Mishnah Berurah in the end of Siman Kuf Ayin says the following: a person should eat good and be satisfied. Yeitav liba b'sudasai, eat good foods, but don't overeat. The Mishnah Berurah quotes a shlah. First he sends you to the Rambam, and then he quotes the shlah. He says a person that eats healthy foods properly, all his sudas will be sudas mitzvah. Now, the shlah didn't just say that. He felt that was the emes. Why? I guess that's the most important halacha of Dal Chalke Shulchan Aruch. What Tzadikim said is Siman Reish Lamed Aleph, B'chol Dorchecha Da'eyu. A person that eats healthy, it's a mitzvah. A person that sleeps enough, it's a mitzvah. So a person that eats healthy and the right quantities is a sudas mitzvah. Now the emes is, as we know, there were tzaddikim that were makbid not to enjoy their food. I know he told me, Rav Segel, the Manchester Yeshiva, stayed in his house, and he said, I'm letting you serve me on one condition. It's the way I like the food. So he got all excited. Oh, no spices, no additives. Cook fish just the way it is. If you add spices, I'm not going to eat your food. That was his condition. So he said, I have to give the God Ladar tasteless food. No, but Rav Segel's in that madrega. The rest of us, we have to follow the Mishnah Berurah. Yeitav liba, eat a good meal, but healthy food, good foods, and then every sud is a sudas mitzvah. Now, the Mishnah Berurah said, look up the shlah. I looked at the shlah, it was amazing. The shlah has 2 pages in the new print, it's Chelik Aleph, Amid Shinai involved. He says some incredible things. Paish Yisrael b'gufay don't wear tefillin. Why don't they wear tefillin? Because they eat too much, they don't have a guf naki. And then he says, Eiza giba kovish yitzray means to eat proper foods. Eiza ashi, he says an incredible type. Yashle beisa kisei samach l'shulchanei. What does that mean? He knows no matter how good the food is, how much I eat, where does it end up? In the beisa kisei. So he thinks about that when he's eating. I'm sorry for saying this. Then he says the type you have to eat l'toiles, not l'toilas. Because saif kol saif, rima v'toilas. This is shlo was shooting one. Then he says that's really the pshat. The mon. If you had too much, it ended up worms. Eating too much ends up, I don't want to say it again, but tailas. This is the shlah that was, frightening, but it's something that's important. The Mishnah Berurah and Kuf Nun Vav quotes a Rambam. I looked at the Rambam to see that this is what the Rambam says. In Loise Kuf Tzadikei, the Rambam says that a person should not overeat, because don't forget, you have a 13-year-old boy who did no real chet, and you give him Mises Bezdin because he's overeating. Why are you giving him? He didn't do anything yet, but this child is helpless and hopeless. What's so bad? Zoylol v'soivei is beyond repair. It's like digging a grave with his own teeth. So this shows you the extent of the Issa. Now, again, it was very hard for me to say this, but I like to say pleasant halachos, but we live in a country, I heard this once when Adam Gadol, he said the world is made up of different countries, and each country is a different part of the guf that's called the world. Each country represents a different part of the body. America is no doubt the boich of the world. Very true. We live in a world that the eating has become, an obsession is not the word for it. It's become, that's life. So we have to be careful that, this shouldn't influence us. Now, I have to mention, someone told me, but on Shabbos, you're allowed to overeat. I said, where'd that come from? He said, I heard it once. I said, well, let me tell you, Akhila Gasa is not an Akhila. You're not allowed to make a bracha on it, and you don't bench. The Rabbi in Kuf Ayin Sif Cotton Chav Gimel quote Seif Hagan. If someone overeats on Shabbos, he's over on 3 averas. He's shamalcha, pentishkach, and bal teshatzu. So there's no special heta for Shabbos. I'd love to hear there is such a heta, but people on Shabbos they eat kanayna hara and then they go to a shalom zach and they start kiyul loyhaya. That's lacking this yisoid. The neshama yisera. Rashi says in Beya that ve'ein nafshei katzalav. Chas v'shalom, that means you could eat and not explode. It means that a tzaddik that's so sensitive during the week, he doesn't enjoy food. He doesn't eat food. He tries to stay away. Shabbos, he enjoys the food. That's Oynik Shabbos. Moshe Wolfson once told me, I watched Satmar Rabbi eat fish. The kavanah that he had eating fish was lo yum ki supa. But you know something? He enjoyed the fish. Oynik Shabbos. That's what Rashi means. You have neshama yisera, that you could enjoy the food. But not that it gives you more room to eat. Akhila gasa chas v'shol. And last but not least, I wanted to talk a little bit about the very intriguing question of eating olives. We mentioned this, there was another shir, tape 102, but basically, doing things that are kosher shikha, according to many shitas, is deraisa. Who stated in the pasuk? Hishamalacha ushmar nafshecha. That's shikha satayra. If somebody chazal consider kosher shikha, and you do that you're doing an act of kosher shikha. That's the issa of Hishamalach. Now, not all agree, but there's no doubt about it. We have to treat kosher shikha with great severity. Now we have a Gemara. In Hayri Daf Yud Gimel Amud Beis, the Gemara says there are 5 things that are kosher shikha, and one of them is eating haragel b'zeisim. So, how come people are eating zeisim? And Yishalayim, the minhag is to have zeisim for breakfast. But the question is even deeper, because you look both in Brachas Lamed Ches and Yavamas Daf Tes Vamad Beis, 2 different Gemaras that Amoraim ate zeisim. It's kosher l'shikha. So the possible resolution, as the Yavitz writes, both in his Pirish in Hoirius and in Morakatsia and Simon Kuf Ayin, that plain zeisim, raw zeisim is kosher l'shikha. But prepared, pickled, preserved zeisim is fine. So therefore, minig Yishalayim is to eat pickled zeisim, and we're fine. However, Zok Chaim Kanievsky has a small kuntris. It's called Sefer Zikaron, and there's things that are kosher l'shikha. And he says, but the Meiri says beferish when he quotes the Gemara in Meiri's and Hayrius, lishmar atzmi udvar mamshakchim like zeisim meluchim. So you see, zeisim meluchim is still awesome. And Reb Chaim says also it's not mistaver that it's only raw olives, because the derech is to eat preserved olives. So we have one heta, but it's not a very good heta. But there's a better heta, because the Gemara says 5 things are kosher l'shikha. If he eats what a mouse ate from, or he's ragil b'zeisim. Ragil, not oichel zeisim, ragil. So maybe it's not a stira. A person that eats ragil, problem. Occasionally is okay, and that would explain the 2 Gemaras and Brachas. And Yavamas, it wasn't ragil. But the shaila is, how do you define the word ragil? So some say ragil means like, ragil, Brachas vava beis, ragil avil beis knesses v'loy ba. I mean, ragil means every single day, but every other day is fine. No, so we have another heta. You want to have olive dip or olive salad occasionally. You go to a chassid, they have olives at the table. No, once in a while, this gefährlich. But again, Reb Chaim Kanievsky obviously was not very in favor of eating olives. He says, but the Gemara says in Brachis Daf Mem, Harogel ba'adashim achas l'shloishim yoim, harogel b'chardel achas l'shloishim yoim. So we see, mitzad Gemara, rogel means once in 30 days. So we have a problem. Mitzad echad, rogel is mutter, and Taka B'chaim says rogel is rogel is asa, but ain't a rogel is mutter, but what's rogel? So if you learn rogel means occasionally, then you're okay. But B'chaim says it has to be 31 days in between. But what bothered me is that the Eretz Yisrael's gebenched with Eretz Zeh Shemen. How could it be that it's only edible every 31 days? If that's what Eretz Yisrael's gebenched with. But that doesn't really bother me anymore, because I looked at the Marsha, and that Gemara says that when the Torah speaks about the Shivas Haminim, it speaks about the fruit. But when it comes to Zayis, it doesn't say Zayis Shemen. Because Shemen Zayis, Gemara says, brings the Karan. That's great. Zaysim is taka kosher l'shikcha. So from Eretz Yisrael being gebenched is not really a raya one way or the other. But now we have a problem. What do we do with this issue? So there's a third possible heta, and that's what the Welt says, because the next words in the Gemara in Hayri says, but if someone eats olive oil, that's moyel l'zikar, and that's good for the memory. So Rav Shlomo Zalman is quoted in Halichas Shloima, in Perek Beis, or 103, and the Sambas Chaim and Tov Kuf Aleph, very Bekitza says it's also. So we have a great Eitzah. Olives is the attack dangerous, we'll call it, kosher shikha. Olive oil is great. So we have a vaccine, that's the popular word today. Put a drop of olive oil into your olives and eskazun to hate. Zalman says a drop is enough. So we have a great Eitzah, even if it's ragel, and even if it's preserved, but put olive oil. But Reb Chaim, again, he's not too in favor of olives. He says that lamaisa, it's posh, you can't rely on this. Because we don't know the understanding of olives and olive oil. How do you know that a little bit of olive oil neutralizes olives? And how do you, maybe a person has a shvacha memory, he needs a gallon of olive oil. How do we know these things are out of our reach? And Taki, in Archas Rabbeinu, in Gimel Kuv Dalid, we find that the Stipler told his Rebbetzin, don't buy olives. So in Chaim's house, he never saw olives. But the point is that even putting oil will not help unless you put a lot of it. Now here I saw something that is mamish amazing. Reb Shlomo Zalman in Halichas Shloim that I mentioned, and also it's in the Seif Madanei Shloim and the new print Amud Reish Mem Vav, said, I think Reb Chaim is incorrect. Because something as asa al sakana, a metaphysical thing we don't understand, we can't extrapolate or assume things. It's only asa exactly the way it says. Rav Moshe Grada says this in Yeridei Gimel Chaf regarding a different issue. When something that we could understand, we could play around with, it's a huadin. But something that's sakana is only vusa state exactly in the Gemara. Says Rav Shlomo Zalman, that's why I felt even a drop of olive oil works. Because the ist is eating plain olives. But once you added the olive oil, it's not sakana. That's where Rav Shlomo Zalman responded to Rav Chaim's point. But here comes the beauty of the sugya. In Orchas Rabbeinu Chele Gimel Kuv Dalid, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman did not live happily ever after this. He told Rabbi Chaim, you should know, you ruined my breakfast. Because for decades I ate like Yishalayim, bread with olive oil, with olives dipped in oil. And after the Sefer came out, I stopped eating my breakfast. So, but wait, it doesn't end there. It says, I saw in a different Sefer, but it was Talmud Muvak said that Rabbi Shlomo Zalman sent me on a mission once. Because he got old and he couldn't eat many of the foods, but he still could eat olive food. So he said, I'm going to be Saimach Lahakov, I think it's mutter. But I don't want Rabbi Chaim to give me credit that I don't deserve. So tell Rabbi Chaim I'm stopping to refrain from eating olives, but I don't get the credit from now on. But till now I did it because of him. But listen how a gadol that was probably 20 plus years older than Rabbi Chaim, he held its mutter lechatchila, but how we deferred to Rabbi Chaim, Rabban Shal Yisrael. But the emes is, if you look in the Magen Avram, in Kuf Aleph, Kuf Ayin, Sif Kat Yutes, he says that even if olive is dangerous, kash l'shikcham, if you do it with kavana, it's moisif zikaron. Now, what does it mean, kavana? So if you look at the Samblas Chaim that I mentioned and the Kafachaim and Kuf Nun Zayin, Chav Zayin, they both say a special nusach that you say when you eat olives, plain olives without olive oil, and that helps to neutralize the bad effect of olives. So Rabbi, let's chazer over. We have basically, to eat olives, we have 4 good reasons to be makel. Number 1, if you're not rogel every day, you have many makilim. If it's preserved, if you add oil, and if you say the tefillah. But one thing I will say, all agree, as the Chaim begins his Sefer Zikaron, Elu dvar makoshe l'shikcha, mi she'enei chayz al talmudai. If you don't chazer, you forget your learning. If you want to school to remember your learning, you chazer, a guten tag to you all.
Shame Irgen Shir, like to be Yashikar or Smith for today's share. Have the great schools sponsoring a share, call Irgen Shir 718-851-8651 or email ist@yeshivanet.com. After Mincher, Bezra Shemer of Smith will say a seekum of today's share. Chananya Menaka Shemer Ratzakadosh Baruch Zakis is Yisrael, the Fikach, Hebelem Torah Mitzvah Shenem Alei Chofetz and Manzitka Yagdol Torah V'Yader.
I saw